Not every bike deserves to be on the road. Some are overpriced, underperforming pieces of junk, mostly bought by rookies or folks who didn't know any better. From bikes that ride like shopping carts to bikes that pretend to be cool but suck at everything, these are 20 motorcycles only dumb people buy. Number 1. Harley-Davidson Street 750. Harley had a plan. Lure in younger riders with an affordable entry-level cruiser, and on paper, the Street 750 sounded like a smart move. But in reality, it was a tone-deaf mess that missed the target by a mile. The V-twin engine was the only thing remotely Harley about this bike. Harley didn't even publish horsepower figures, probably out of shame. The street rod version tried to fix things with more power and twin front discs, but even that couldn't salvage the ergonomic disaster. By 2021, Harley quietly killed the whole project, pretending it never happened. Let's talk ride quality. It was rough and caused uneven vibrations. The suspension was brutal. For a bike its size, it didn't have a fuel gauge, tachometer, or even parking lights. But this wasn't even much of a big deal like fishtailing at speed, and the fueling at low revolutions per minute is lumpier than old oatmeal. Want to see what's behind you? Too bad. The mirrors are stubby enough to double as shoulder check blindfolds. Trying to get better tires and longer stems would even cost you, along with overpriced parts and dealer service that treats street owners like second-class citizens. Sure, it looks cool in blacked-out trim, but this isn't a bike you show off. It's the one you park behind the bar and pray no one notices. If you're after the Harley lifestyle, skip this sad cosplay. Get a used Sportster. At least then, you'll have a bike with a soul. Next up, number 2, Honda DN01. The Honda DN01 came with its own warning label, "Do not own one." And honestly, that should have been the marketing slogan. Honda claimed it was trying to attract non-riders, that is, people intimidated by motorcycles. What they built instead was a 600-pound design experiment with the practicality of a snow globe. The DN01 tried to be a cruiser, a scooter, and a sport bike all at once, and somehow ended up being none of them. It had a 680cc V-twin from the Transalp, shoved into a frame longer than most Harleys, with a wheelbase over 1,600 mm. And the human-friendly transmission? More like, human what the hell is this? It had 2 automatic modes and a faux 6-speed manual option, none of which made it fun, intuitive, or even usable in city riding. It looked like something Batman's accountant would ride. Cool from a distance, but a disaster in motion. Its comfort was terrible, and its touring capacity was somehow worse. Passenger space was somehow missing. At $14,599 in 2009, you could have had an actual motorcycle or two. Even Honda fans didn't bite. It was so weird, so impractical, and so overpriced that most people didn't even know it existed. Those who did probably worked at the dealership, quietly shaking their heads every time one came in for service, which wasn't often because almost no one bought them. It was unique, but so is a flaming Segway. Doesn't mean you should ride one. Another bike you might want to avoid is number 3, Suzuki B-King. The Suzuki B-King isn't a bad bike. In fact, it's kind of awesome. But it still lands on this list for one reason: false promises. When it debuted as a concept at the 2001 Tokyo Motor Show, the B-King looked like it had just rolled out of Batman's garage. Supercharged Hayabusa engine with 240 horsepower, carbon fiber, stainless steel, and leather trim. It had a computer system with GPS-based weather warnings, helmet visor HUD, fingerprint ignition, and the ability to talk to thieves through your phone. It sounded like Kit from Knight Rider on 2 wheels. Fast forward to 2007, and the production version limps onto the market with none of that. No supercharger, no futuristic tech, just a naturally aspirated Hayabusa engine, making 181 horsepower and 164 brake horsepower, wrapped in styling that looked 5 years past its sell-by date. The B-King was powerful, sure, but heavy and clumsy in corners. No ABS, a tiny fuel tank. And despite that monster engine, performance felt strangely muted, especially at high revolutions per minute. It's like Suzuki built a hype train, then delivered a moped in cosplay. Worst of all, it never figured out who it was for. Tourers found it impractical, street riders found it bloated, drag guys found the clutch setup annoying, and everyone else just found it confusing. It's not hated for what it is, though. It's mourned for what it could have been. Suzuki B-King was a dream bike that woke up bland. Suzuki wasn't the only bike giving false promises, this next bike did as well. Number 4, Bimota V2. The Bimota V2 had every reason to be legendary. Lightweight, beautiful, powered by a 500cc two-stroke engine at a time when MotoGP still worshipped them. And best of all, it promised a clean-burning, fuel-injected stroker, built not by amateurs, but by Bimota, the kings of boutique engineering. It should have been perfect. Instead, it was a two-wheeled panic attack. Fuel injection had long been the death knell of two-strokes. No one could make it work. But Bimota tried anyway, spending over a decade building the V2 around their in-house direct injection system. But it just didn't work. The result was a bike that coughed, sputtered, stalled, and occasionally tried to launch itself into orbit with random bursts of full throttle. Hardened racers, we're talking guys used to wrangling death machines on Sundays, even called it unrideable. There was no fixing it. Promises of software updates never came. The only real solution was to rip out the injection system and bolt on carbs. After years of hype, Bimota ended up buying back the bikes in shame, bankrupting themselves in the process. And yet, it still looks gorgeous. Some collectors are paying over $30,000 for low-mile examples. Nostalgia, apparently, sells even when the product barely runs. At least the V2 knew what it wanted to look like. This next bike didn't. Number 5, Yamaha Niken GT. The rule is 2 wheels and an engine equal a motorcycle. So what the hell's the Yamaha Niken? 3 wheels, 2 forks, a price tag that says premium innovation, and a buyer base that said, nah, I'm good. Most people have never seen one on the road, only in showrooms collecting dust and pity glances. Yamaha had the brilliant idea to take the MT-09 engine, one of their best, and bolt it onto a 3-wheeled sports tourer that looks like it fell out of a Transformers fever dream. It's as if someone looked at the Honda DN01, said, what if it was heavier at Yasso, and called it progress? Who was this for? Not sport bike guys because they wanted an R9, not a 3-legged tank. Not touring riders because they already had the Tracer 9 GT. And 3-wheeler fans? Most of them quit the scene when Can-Am gave up pretending those things were cool. Let's talk drawbacks. Steering is heavy and numb, low-speed handling is awkward, and the bike's sheer size makes filtering through traffic feel like navigating a sofa through a hallway. The fuel range was meh. The ground clearance was average and the price was just too high. The worst part was that it was over-engineered. The front end looks like a mechanical spider and has more moving parts than a Swiss watch, which means more things to break and good luck fixing them without a PhD in suspension dynamics. The Niken GT wasn't a terrible bike in totality because you'll still find some riders who'll swear it's one of the best things they've ever ridden. The next dumb bike on the list is number 6, Suzuki RE5. Okay, this one's going to ruffle some feathers. The Suzuki RE5 had one job: make the rotary engine cool. Instead, it made it expensive, fragile, and borderline ridiculous. On paper, it sounded wild, a free-revving Wankel engine in a Japanese touring bike. But in reality, the RE5 needed more servicing than riding. Rotor tips wore out like erasers, and Suzuki's famously soft metal didn't help. One review said it needed a service bay at the end of every road. Oil consumption was worse than a 2-stroke on race day, and the engine's thirst for fuel meant you'd be gambling to make it 100 miles on a tank. Crack the throttle open too far, and you'd cut that range in half. You could probably pull a long-distance tour with it only if you packed a mechanic and a fuel truck. And the design was the best. The radiator looked like it was stolen off a Wadwam 2 tank. The instrument cluster, complete with a slide-open Perspex cover, looked like a prop from a rejected 1970s sci-fi pilot. Giugiaro tried to be futuristic, but he missed. Despite costing twice as much as a normal Japanese bike and 4 times as much to keep alive, it wasn't faster, lighter, or more fun than anything else on the road. Even Norton's rotary bikes made more sense, and that's saying something. The RE5 did more than flop. It almost bankrupted Suzuki. Bold idea, terrible execution. A bike remembered more for trying something new than getting anything right. With the next bike, another confused bike joins the list once more. Number 7, BSA Aerial 3. This bike, or whatever it claimed to be, was a funeral on 3 wheels. Meet the BSA Aerial 3, a bizarre bending trike that helped sink an entire motorcycle empire. In 1970, after years of market research, BSA launched the Aerial 3, a three-wheeled moped with one goal: revolutionize urban mobility. What they ended up building was a mechanical punchline. The Aerial 3 was supposed to tilt and lean like a motorcycle, but in practice, it handled like a shopping cart with a death wish. Original designer George Wallace even said BSA's in-house team refused all advice, and it showed. Despite forecasting massive success, about 2,000 units per week, only a few hundred were ever sold, while the rest likely died in warehouses or were melted down in shame. The project cost BSA over £2 million in the early 70s, which is roughly £26 million today, and in return, they got a bike so unpopular, it might have been cursed. With weak performance, awkward handling, and a look that screamed bad idea on wheels, it flopped hard. So hard, in fact, that it's often credited as one of the final nails in the coffin of Britain's once proud motorcycle industry. The Aerial 3 didn't just fail in the showroom. It failed in the boardroom, the factory, and the legacy books. The only thing it leaned into was disaster. The BSA might have looked ridiculous, but at least it worked a bit. This next bike didn't. Number 8. Dodge Tomahawk. A machine so absurd, so blatantly not a motorcycle, it makes trikes look traditional. The Dodge Tomahawk was more of an identity breakdown. It was a four-wheeled fever dream that somehow still gets called a motorcycle. Yes, 4 wheels. Not 2, not even 3. 4. This thing looked like a final boss in twisted metal, packed a Dodge Viper V10 engine, and promised a top speed north of 300 miles per hour. But it never actually did anything. The Tomahawk was a rolling concept, a non-functional mock-up dressed in chrome and hype. The bike didn't have proper engineering behind it. Dodge paraded it around auto shows like a silver unicorn, claimed it would sell for $1 gazillion, and then nothing. No road tests, no deliveries, no confirmed buyers, just smoke, mirrors, and confusion. Meanwhile, Alan Milliard actually built a real V10 bike in his garage that ran, and ran well. The Tomahawk, on the other hand, sat on pedestals, collecting dust and internet myths. Yet somehow, people still call it the fastest bike ever made, based on fantasy specs and a press release from 2003. Let's be honest, the Tomahawk was never a bike. It was a rolling sculpture, a concept art piece powered by marketing delusion. Cool to look at, maybe, but fastest ever built? Not until we see it do a run. Until then, it belongs right here on the list of dumb bikes, with the rest of the legends that never lived up to the hype. With a tag price of over $500,000, nobody even wanted it. Moving on to number 9, Yamaha YZF R1. The Yamaha YZF R1 is an engineering marvel. It is light, fast, razor-sharp, and race-proven. It's also one of the most uncomfortable motorcycles ever built, but in a 2017 Superbike shootout, it shockingly placed 6th out of 7. The ergonomics were just brutal. With foot pegs set high, a seat that feels like plywood in a prison riot, and clip-ons positioned somewhere near your shins, the R1 doesn't so much ask you to ride it. It dares you to survive it instead. The bike is track-only sadism, and even there, riders grimace between sessions. Sure, it's dominated American superbike racing for years, but it hasn't won a single major street shootout in over a decade. That's not a coincidence. Why would you pick this over the MT-10, which shares the same engine and core DNA and is actually rideable? You get 90% of the performance with none of the orthopedic bills. But if you need a torture rack with wings, by all means buy an R1. But don't say no one warned you when your wrists are shot, your back's wrecked, and your MT-10 owning friend is still smiling after 300 miles. The next silly bike is number 10, Kawasaki Vulcan 2000. Japanese cruisers have their loyal fans. They're usually smoother, more reliable, and better built than their American inspirations. But sometimes the copycat gets carried away, and the Kawasaki Vulcan 2000 is Exhibit A in that disaster. This thing weighed 820 pounds dry, basically a motorcycle-shaped refrigerator. Kawasaki figured if Harley fans loved big V-twins, they'd adore a 2053cc torque monster with 121 feet-pounds on tap. And sure, the engine pulled like a freight train until you hit 5,200 revolutions per minute and bounced off the rev limiter like a drunk off a trampoline, and God help your hand because the clutch required Hulk-level grip. Riders joked that it came with a gym membership. The seat was 27 inches off the ground, but comically wide and thin, punishing both short and tall riders alike. The bars were stretched out like you were flying a biplane, not cruising a boulevard. It looked heavy. It felt heavy. It was heavy. Even getting it off the side stand felt like deadlifting a small horse. And when the 2008 financial crash hit, this chrome battleship went down with the ship, along with the rest of the bigger is better cruiser movement. Yes, it had power. Yes, it was well built. But in trying to out-Harley, Kawasaki built a motorcycle that was somehow too much and not enough at the same time. Next up is number 11, Hyosung GT 650R. If Hyosung really did build engines for Suzuki, rumor has it they clearly kept the good ones for Suzuki. Because when left to their own devices, Hyosung built bikes like the GT 650R, a machine that looked like it should be good, but felt like it was held together with duct tape and denial. It had promise. A V-twin engine, full fairing, and a price tag a few $100 lower than a real SV 650. But the moment you got on one, the illusion shattered like cheap plastic. The transmission was vague and clunky, with an occasional bonus feature of popping out of gear mid-ride. The brakes and clutch felt like gripping a dead fish, and fit and finish was more of a dollar store model kit. Every review hedged its words like the bike might sue for defamation. Cycle World called it not tragically far behind its Japanese counterparts. Translation: it's bad, but not a war crime. Add in random backfires, electrical gremlins, wobbly front tires, and gear issues, and you've got a bike that might run or might strand you halfway through your ego trip. To make it worse, it's not even good looking. You expect janky styling from a knockoff brand. But this came from South Korea, a country that builds stylish Hyundais and Kias. Meanwhile, the GT 650R looks like it was designed during a power outage. With the next bike, Honda disappointed with false promises. Number 12, Honda CTX 1300. When Honda announced a cruiser-style bagger powered by the ST 1300's V4, expectations were high. A muscle cruiser with sport touring pedigree? Sign us up. But what they delivered was the CTX 1300, a heavy, neutered machine that sounded like a vacuum and felt like a missed opportunity on two wheels. Instead of dialing up the performance, Honda re-engineered the 1,261cc V4 into a torquey, low-revving plotter. With a red line at just 7,000 revolutions per minute, the motor had all the excitement of a dial tone. The exhausts looked mean, but sounded muted. And the CTX was boring and awkward. Weighing in at 730 pounds or 338 kilograms, it handled like a soggy brick in corners, scraping pegs early thanks to comically low ground clearance. It also came with a price tag north of $18,000, which makes the whole experience sting more. Even American Honda seemed embarrassed. They literally sent a journalist on a fishing trip rather than let this bike compete in a shootout. Look, it's not offensively bad, it's just tragically bland. A paint-by-numbers cruiser with none of the bite, roar, or soul it promised. At least Honda tried to keep things under control. Kawasaki decided the 60s bikes were too boring and went all out, but created a joke. Number 13, Kawasaki H1500 and H2750. In the late 60s, Kawasaki took one look at the competition and decided subtlety was for cowards. So they crammed a fire-breathing two-stroke triple into a lightweight frame and called it the H1. The result was a bike with 60 horsepower, explosive acceleration, and all the structural integrity of a folding chair. The H1 was the beginning of the madness. Then came the H2 in 1972, bumping up to 750cc and 74 horsepower. More speed, more smoke, more terrified riders. It wasn't long before the H2 earned its infamous nickname, Widowmaker, and it earned it honestly. The handling was a suggestion, not a feature. The chassis flexed like a pool noodle. The suspension was barely adequate for casual cruising, and the brakes were overwhelmed before you even touched them. Open the throttle too hard, and the bike would lurch forward like it had something to prove and something to kill. The bikes were front-heavy and lazy in corners. These bikes demanded skill, patience, and a strong life insurance policy. The bikes were no doubt fast and beautiful, but they were also deeply flawed as they were built during an era when Japanese manufacturers prioritized horsepower over human survivability. For some, the raw chaos was part of the charm. For others, it was their last ride. Still, with Kawasaki, we have number 14, Kawasaki Eliminator 125. The Kawasaki Eliminator 125 isn't terrible, it's just so utterly forgettable that it might as well come with a built-in apology. It's light, It's easy to ride and sips fuel like a responsible adult. But unless you're brand new to motorcycles or recently gave up cycling, it wasn't delivering the it factor. The 125cc engine is underwhelming on a good day and actively stressed on a bad one. Put a passenger on the back, hit a slight incline, and you'll swear the bike's begging for mercy. On the highway, you'll feel like you're stuck in time while everyone else passes in fast forward. It was made for beginners, and that's fine. But even by beginner standards, it's undercooked. There are no real accessories. The carburetor can be temperamental, and the brake is just as terrible. Worst of all, it looks like a cruiser. It promises big boy attitude, but delivers lawnmower performance. You're not riding, you're just politely existing in traffic. Moving on to number 15, Benelli TNT 135. The Benelli TNT 135 looks like a riot, and it is, right up until it leaves you stranded in traffic with the engine sputtering like it just remembered it's made in China. Touted as a mini bike with a big attitude, the TNT 135 is Benelli's shot at the Honda Grom crowd. Small, feisty, affordable, and allegedly fun. And while it can be fun in short bursts, owning one often feels like dating someone who's cute, unpredictable, and terrible at communication. The engine has a habit of cutting off at the worst times, even at higher speeds. Sometimes it stalls. The Benelli sports a full LED setup, but the indicators barely register in daylight, and the taillight, despite its brightness, aims at the pavement like it's trying not to be seen. Then there's the electrical system, which seems wired with hope and rust. Faulty ignition barrels and blown fuses, especially the fuel pump fuse, are practically initiation rites. Low ground clearance doesn't help either. With the stock foot pegs, you'll be dragging parts in corners you didn't even know had corners. Sure, it's cheap, but you're paying for it in diagnostics. Some owners just give up and sell it after a few months of mechanical mood swings. To be honest, for a $2,500 bike, you get your money's worth. If you think the TNT wasn't delivering, this next bike is here to deliver worse. Number 16, KTM 390 Adventure. The KTM 390 Adventure was supposed to be the gateway drug to off-road glory. What we got instead was a reskinned 390 Duke in cargo pants, an adventure bike in theory, a commuter in practice, and a compromise everywhere else. Built in partnership with Bajaj, the 390 Adventure feels like it. It was lightweight and budget-friendly, but everything from the switchgear to the finish screams cheap, and not in a charming way. Riders expecting Dakar DNA ended up with a twitchy front end, harsh low-speed suspension, and foot pegs that belonged on a yoga mat, not a trail. Moving to performance. The single-cylinder engine can hit highway speeds, but the low-end torque is so soft, you'd think the bike was apologizing. It stalls easily in traffic, and owners have developed an entire religion around clutch feathering to avoid conking out at lights. It had a bunch of electrical issues such as fuel pump failures, rectifier issues, and a navigation system that sometimes just doesn't work. And if you're outside certain regions, good luck finding half the features KTM advertises. Yes, it's marketed as a beginner ADV bike, but that's the problem. It teaches beginners all the wrong things, like how to hate rough roads, how to distrust electronics, and how to replace your fuel pump before your first real trip. And the next bike just brings in more lies to the table. Number 17, Aprilia Moto 6.5. The Aprilia Moto 6.5 was supposed to be bold, artistic, and different. Mission accomplished. It looked like a traffic cone mated with a blender. Designed by Philippe Starck, the Moto 6.5 wasn't so much a motorcycle as it was a conversation piece no one wanted to have. Let's start with the design. It tried to be futuristic, minimalist, and sleek. Instead, it became a masterclass in how to alienate every type of rider at once. It wasn't a dual sport. It wasn't a naked. It was more like a mistake with mirrors. The 650cc Rotax single should have had some bite, but Aprilia detuned it until it delivered a forgettable 43 horsepower. It was okay in the city if you liked looking like you were riding an appliance. Out on the open road, it felt gutless, unstable, and confused. Handling was another crime scene. Overdamped forks up front, sponge cake in the rear. The suspension couldn't decide whether to punish you or lull you into a false sense of comfort before bottoming out. The build quality wasn't so nice either. Bits fell off, corrosion showed up like it had an invite, and owners reported everything from stripped sump plugs to gunked up brake systems. Reliability was basically non-existent. This next bike doesn't quite belong on the list, but the early versions of it kinda did some things wrong. Number 18, Ducati 748. The Ducati 748 is gorgeous. sleek, sculpted, dripping with Italian pedigree. It's also a rolling red flag for anyone who thinks owning a Ducati means just riding and smiling. Mostly the late 90s versions of the bike, though. The 748 demands constant attention, valve adjustments, timing belt replacements, fluid checks, and prayers. Missing a service interval is bad news. Be ready to welcome rocker arms, crank trouble, aging fuel lines. The clutch is horrible and numb. Feels like you're squeezing concrete through a straw. Racers didn't care because they used it once at launch and never touched it again, but in the real world, it's a headache. Next up is number 19, Morbidelli 5.8. The Morbidelli 5.8 should have been a masterpiece. Giancarlo Morbidelli, former racing genius, set out to build the fastest, smoothest, most comfortable Italian motorcycle ever. Instead, he gave us a $200,000 amphibian with handlebars. Let's start with the good, the engine. An 847cc, 32-valve DOHC V8 that purred like a Swiss watch. Unfortunately, it also moved like a Swiss watch, delicate, expensive, and ultimately underwhelming. It made 100 horsepower. Not bad if you were riding it in the 1970s. In reality, it was outpaced by everything from leader bikes to angry scooters. Then there's the design. Blame Pininfarina all you want, but this thing looked like a frog in the middle of a vasectomy. The original bodywork was so awful it had to be reworked, and even then, it still looked like something your nightmares wouldn't finish rendering. The chassis was too short. The ride was uncomfortable. There was no room for passengers, and the stability was a joke. It was a V8-powered contradiction. Massively engineered, yet completely unusable. At a price equivalent to a small villa, you'd expect something transcendent. What you got was an exotic garage queen with a fragile ego and worse ergonomics. Only 3 or 4 were ever built, and nobody lined up for more. The Morbidelli 5.8 became a museum piece before it ever became a motorcycle. And finally, number 20, Suzuki TM400 Cyclone. The Suzuki TM400 Cyclone released in 1971, and it earned its reputation the hard way by high-siding, bucking, and maiming a generation of riders who dared underestimate its mood swings. Let's be clear, this wasn't a badly built bike. It was just horrifically unhinged. At its core sat a 396cc two-stroke single with a power band so unpredictable it may as well have been randomized. One minute it was bogging out, the next it was wheelie launching itself into low orbit. Jody Weisel of Motocross Action didn't call it the worst bike I ever raced as a joke. He meant it. The handling was more like hanging on for dear life. The TM400 didn't corner so much as lunge in a direction of its choosing. The rear suspension was prehistoric, the frame flexed like a wet ruler, and throttle control was about as binary as a landmine. And yes, Roger DeCoster raced one. But if your riding skill is anything less than factory-level demigod, the TM400 will eat you alive. A beginner on a Cyclone was essentially signing up for a physics lesson in pain. Collectors now adore it for its vintage charm. But charm doesn't erase its past as a two-wheeled death bike. What other bike do you think belongs on this list? Drop it down in the comments section and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel.